Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, February 14th, 2025. Happy Valentine's Day. This episode is sponsored by Passages International. Looking for a way to honor your loved one while honoring the planet? Passages specializes in eco-friendly funeral products made from renewable, biodegradable materials. Whether it's a stunning willow casket, a biodegradable urn for scattering, or their unique memorial keepsakes, Passages helps create meaningful goodbyes that tread lightly on the earth. Join the movement toward greener funerals. Visit passagesinternational.com and discover how you can celebrate a life while protecting the planet for generations to come. Link in the show notes. We are covering a bunch of stories this week in Funeral Service Insider and on In Case You Missed It. And one of the ones that won't be commented on below because we've already done a bunch of reporting on it is the earnings report from SCI, which came out on the morning of the 13th. If you are a Funeral Service Insider subscriber, we've already sent you notification and a copy of our reporting on it. I think what's important to share for everyone is not so much the earnings, but where they came from. In last July, SCI switched its insurance partner, or added, Global Atlantic as their insurance partner, and they changed the way they've been doing pre-need sales on the SCI Direct products. What is interesting about that is they've taken a little bit of a hit because of it, as they're pulling people kind of like off the street to get them trained and get them licensed and get them back out. And so about 75% of those people are trained. The other 25% should be trained soon. And SCI is looking to really they're already adjusting their forward-looking revenue attributed to this by maybe 3% more in 2025, and they think 2026 is going to be a really big year for their pre-need and for their cemetery sales. So that is worth noticing. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is if you are a subscriber to American Cemetery and Cremation, or again, you can use your free access to check out this story that's coming out in March. Jody Dupree of SCI, who kind of runs their cemetery, he goes through how they train their people to sell to families and to make sure that families get what they want. You know, we've had this discussion a lot. As direct cremation rises, people are having trouble finding ways to continue to generate revenue. And, you know, it was a really great story. The bottom line is, start offering them. You can bury remains. You know, you can as he says, you know, you can bury ashes, you can scatter ashes. There are a bunch of things that you can do. And so why not try? And he has all of his people are trying with the most and then backing down from there. And it's giving the families the opportunity to, again, every option, every time. We say that a lot, but if we're not doing that in the cemeteries, then it could be difficult. But, you know, SCI has solved a bunch of problems, and there's nothing wrong with looking at a big company and seeing what they do well and seeing, you know, how you can emulate it. So link to that coverage in the show notes, but I'm really looking forward to that part. The other things that we have coming up are, I want to talk a little bit about legislation, and we have the celebration of an iconic Black funeral director that I want to mention and link to, and some other fun stories. So let's get into it. A couple little promotional things I wanted to mention. The first is we just recorded a really, really good, it wasn't quite a webinar. It was more of a presentation with Teresa Carlson of the Bank Corp and about succession. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You should watch it. It's really good. She's really engaging, and there's lots of cool stuff in there. You know, she is a banker. She does these deals all the time. She does deals big and small, and the back and forth, it was kind of almost like an interview style. I kept interrupting her during her presentation with questions, and then she took whatever trail the questions led her off on. And it's really been one of the better ones we've done in quite some time. I'm pretty proud of it. So take a look at that. And the other thing is, I would love to let you know to come to Pittsburgh. We will be in Pittsburgh for a one-day event on April 1st. I am not kidding. There'll be a link to it in the show notes. We are putting up the speakers as we speak. And if you'd like a discount code, you can reach out to me. I have several free passes available, but I would like to know who I'm giving them to, so you can shoot me an email. All of my contact information is in the links, and of course, at the end of the show, I'll go through how to get in contact with me. All right, now let's get into it. It is almost smack dab in the middle of Black History Month. But I did want to share with you this story about Morrell Warren T.D. Thornhill Jr. Link in the show notes. He was a civil rights activist and the first Black mayor of Lynchburg, Virginia. And of course, he was a funeral director. He went to Eccles College in 1976, and he managed the funeral home that he had kind of grown up working in. He eventually came to serve as the CEO of Community Funeral Home, which was Lynchburg's first Black-owned funeral home. There's a link to the story in the show notes. I guess the place that I want to start is by offering you spoilers. So I've started something new this week that I hope to continue, which is I'm posting the stories that I intend to or may cover on In Case You Missed It on my LinkedIn page. And I'm Tony Russo at Funeral Service Insider. I'm easy enough to find. And then with a little bit of commentary. And then I also enclose them in the story that I send out to you as part of the Sunday column, if you are a subscriber, with a little bit more detail and a little bit more finesse. So this was posted on LinkedIn by me. And the issue that I have with this story is, I think, going to be the dominant issue for the next 3 or 4 years, although it seems petty. So, once upon a time, after I started here, I had been here for not very long, and I came across this funeral director, Bernard Buggs, who was opening his own funeral home, and I did kind of a short profile on him. He was in Alabama. There's a link to the profile in the show notes. And one of the things he said about having, about his startup costs was that he had to buy 8 caskets because that was the law. And I said, but you're not doing a lot of casketed funerals? He said, no, they're in a shed. I have to have 8 caskets in a shed because it's the law. So I reached out to the Alabama Funeral Directors Association and I said, is it true? Do you know why it's the law? And they said, nope, we know that the law was changed to make it 8 in 1976. And I said, why 8? And the Indiana Funeral Directors Association was I have no idea. So I filed that back away. There was no story to be had there, except that funeral home laws are going to come under assault in the next year. I've been doing some research as part of my coverage of the Indiana death doula case, and I think that's the first of several. You have to remember that, and I don't need to tell you, the funeral industry has not updated its laws generally recently. And as a result, there are holes that people don't know about, except people who want to exploit them. And I'm not accusing, the death doula movement of exploiting them in any way, shape, or form. But if there were written with no future in mind, then they're going to come down. Something that I used to do before I did this was I wrote about beer, and one of the really interesting things at kind of the beginning of the craft beer revolution was quite similar to this, where laws had been written in the 1930s and never revisited. They're like, we're going to make alcohol legal, we're going to make it legal, and they didn't really look at the laws, and we found out that a lot of people were operating, illegal breweries because nobody found this law from 1875 that said, Irishmen aren't allowed to own Catholic bars on Fridays, or whatever idiotic anti-competition laws that were put in place when Prohibition ended and, larger breweries started kind of writing the legislation. I think a very similar thing is happening here in the funeral industry, and it's going to be something worth paying close attention to. The story in specific is a story in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and a funeral director who is also a quilter is selling quilts to support her funeral directing habit. That is, they can't keep up with the costs, with rising costs, one of which is that they have to have 12 caskets. They have to have 12 caskets on premises, and it's the law. And no one's going to change that law in Wyoming because it doesn't affect them. And one of the challenges that I would like to issue to any of the states is to take a look at these and see what you can do to protect your funeral directors and the funeral industry from being swallowed up by holes in old, poorly conceived, anti-competitive laws. You know what they are. I'll tell you what, if there are any laws about how many caskets you have to open a funeral home, that might be a good place to start. It's not going to help this woman. The headline, by the way, which I loved, was "Funeral Home Fights for Its Life." And there's a link to it in the show notes. There are so many other, sad parts of this story, and we don't have time to read them to you. And it was already pretty well written, so there's no point in me doing it again. But take a look at that story, and again, take a look at the laws, the dumb things that you have to do to be a funeral director. Other people don't have to do, which is what Indiana is finding out the hard way and what California kind of found out the hard way. So it might be time to get ahead of this because, as again, in my research, I've come across this, the Institute of Justice, which is a nonprofit that has found the funeral industry and has found how old and outdated, outmoded those laws are, and is trying to get them overturned as almost like a deregulatory action. So I wanted to include this story last week, but I ran out of time and space, and it was still kind of coming together as I was recording, so I decided to leave it for this week. But if you haven't seen it, take a look at the show notes and click on and watch the video because it's pretty cool. David Uchi, he is a funeral director in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, who lives next door to the funeral home where he works. And when that funeral home caught on fire at 4:30 in the morning, he leaped out of bed and ran to the funeral home next door. And this is, winter in Rhode Island. And then he dragged out the 4 bodies that were downstairs in the prep room and, saved them from being burned in the fire and was able to get them someplace else, safely that night. And it's just, these are the kind of stories that aren't really told. I mean, it's, I guess, not really told enough. And it has to do with funeral directors not, I think, reaching out to say, hey, I did something heroic. This one obviously couldn't go unnoticed because it was a huge fire and it was a big deal. But it's important to make sure that you celebrate the industry when you can. When you're doing good deeds, you should say it, because when other people do bad deeds, they tend to get caught. But I just wanted to a tip of the hat for quick thinking and genuine dedication. I mean, it took 15 minutes. He is in and out of a burning funeral home 4 times to pick up dead bodies just so the families didn't have to hear that their already dead loved one was lost again in a tragic fire. So, I mean, there's, if there was a medal, if anybody out there hands out medals, this is definitely a gentleman who deserves one for the action and the selflessness of making things okay for his families. And link in the show notes. It's just, again, I don't often get to tell a lot of good stories, and this is my second one for the week. Hopefully it becomes a habit. Natural organic reduction has stalled in Utah again. They did not bring it up to a vote because the House didn't think that it had enough votes to get it out of committee. And I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been covering legislatures for too long to have any respect for the intellect of someone just because they are a state representative. In fact, in my experience, a state representative is someone least likely to have the kind of intellect that you have to take seriously. And I'm always surprised when I come across a bright one. And so this Utah thing is particularly, so I talked to one guy in Minnesota last year who said, we can't allow non-Jews and non-Muslims to be buried in the ground without a casket because the wolves will dig them up. And in Utah, they don't know what decomposing human bodies will do to the soil. Someone said that out loud to a newspaper reporter, and the newspaper reporter printed it and didn't point out that it was bone-achingly stupid. It's hard to cover. Some of these stories are really hard to cover. There's a link in the show notes. And just real quick, I forgot to mention it in the show, so I'm sticking it here at the end before the credits. During the SCI call this morning, they asked them about if they knew anything that we didn't know about the replacement for the funeral rule, what was going to happen with the funeral rule. They essentially said you read all the same papers we do, but SCI is already prepared, according to them, for whatever the funeral rule happens to be. Whether it's a good idea or not wasn't really what they were talking about. They said that there were certainly lots of problems with it, but whether there are problems with it is not really the issue now. Whether there are problems with it used to be the issue. Now the issue is, can you get yourself compliant and protect yourself? And I think that you should. Last week in Funeral Service Insider, by coincidence actually, I had the Nikki Wiedemann from Dead Ringers. I was re-promoting the podcast that she did about this time last year on the funeral rule. So I'll put that link in the show notes. If you want to re-listen to that show, it'll definitely be worth re-listening. Funeral Service Insider, in case you missed it, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. That is easy to do unless you're listening on your computer, when it could be more difficult. If you're listening on your computer but would like to listen on your phone, just grab your phone out, find your podcast app. If you have an Android, it's probably Spotify. It could be Amazon Music. If you have an iPhone, it is almost certainly Apple Podcasts. Type in Funeral Service Insider and you will get to us. We're the only ones with that name. We would love to have comments. I mentioned earlier, that we're looking to get more comments. And if you'd like to leave voicemail feedback, you can do so at 732-746-0233, extension 709. That is 732-746-0233, extension 09. Leave a message if it's appropriate. I will play it. If it's mean about me, I will still play it. If it's mean about other people, I probably won't. And if you'd like to email me, you can email me A like Anthony, Russo, Russo, at K like Kite, B like Boy, publications.com. And that will do it for this episode, and we will check in with you next time.